Hi, Shawn Ravenfire here, and I'm about to discuss something that is very popular on YouTube. Is there a God? Now, generally people try to answer these questions, but I'm not going to try to answer it. I'm just going to try to prove that any proof that you think that you have isn't really proof. So the short answer is, I don't know, and neither do you, so shut the fuck up. But let's go for the long answer, shall we? First off, I want to get a few questions out of the way, because I'm sure that you're going to have questions, and so I'm just going to address them before you even ask. Question number one, am I making fun of religion? No. That's my other job. When I'm on stage acting in the capacity of a stand-up comedian, then I make fun of things. Right now, I'm putting my non-comedian hat on, my philosopher hat on, which is the same literal hat, but a different figurative hat, and speaking in a purely academic sense. Second question, am I going to be using formal logic? Well, no. For a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that formal logic is pretentious, and it tends to get bogged down in details. I'm more of a big picture sort of guy, and mostly because the jargon just seems to be deliberately confusing. And I want to make sure that everybody can actually understand what I'm saying. Question number three, why is the comment section of this video disabled? Well, videos with titles such as this one are kind of magnets for people who just want to preach their own point of view. And a lot of times they don't even watch the video, they just do a search. I'm assuming they just do a search for any title that has a topic that they want to comment on. They just jump in there, comment, and then leave. I wouldn't exactly call them trolls, more like hobgoblins or something. And rather than deal with all of that, and rather than go through all the comments, have it turn into a message board, a discussion forum for. I'm going to address practically anything that most people are going to bring up, but I mean, I'm sure that you might have some new ideas, but mostly it's just going to be the same old, same old. So rather than clutter up the comment section with that, I'm just disabling the comments right in advance. 4. And this is a question I get asked very much. Why did I take down my religious debate series? A lot of people really liked the religious debate videos, and I took them down. Why did I do this? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, I was having troubles with the Extra Normal site. They kept changing it. They would have a background, say this is a free-to-use background, and then the next time I go there, oh, we changed the rules, now you have to pay to use this background. And his character has this voice, and then you come back a little bit later, oh, we changed it, now he has a completely different voice. And then the commands, oh, we have a command that makes him do this. And then we change, oh, now he doesn't do this anymore. Now instead we have a feature that makes him do this. And why do I want him to do that? And so there were just too many problems with the site, and a lot of times it would freeze up, and I would lose a whole bunch of unsaved work. And I just got tired of dealing with that. That's why I stopped making new videos. But the main reason I took the old videos down was because I wanted to have a YouTube channel that featured things that I came up with, and even though I came up with the words, the characters, the animation, they were all automatic. It was too easy, anybody could do it, and it wasn't really a me production. And also, I thought the voices were too flat. They didn't really carry any emotion. A lot of people didn't seem to understand if I was trying to be sarcastic, if I was being satirical, if I was trying to make a legitimate argument. And this really, I mean, a lot of people got it. A lot of people got that it was social satire, but a lot of people seemed to miss the point, and I think the biggest problem was the voices. The automatic voice acting, it just didn't convey the emotion I want. So possibly what I'd like to do in the future is I'd like to do a live action version of the religious debate videos, reenact all of them. I mean, some of the jokes don't work, like where the clown says, you know, what if none of this is real? What if we're computer animated? You know, jokes like that aren't going to work in a live action version, but I'll come up with something analogous. But I'm not going to be able to get to that for a while because I'm really busy with other things. But one of these days I will get to hopefully get to a live-action version of the religious debate series. And some people might ask, why am I not dressed as a clown right now? And I actually thought about that. I actually thought it would be funny to do this whole video series. I won't be able to do all this in one episode. I've got so much to cover. Like I said, it's the long answer. I won't be able to do all of this in one video, so I'm going to have to break it into sections. And I actually considered doing it in a clown costume, but I decided not to for two reasons. One, I didn't feel like looking for a clown costume. And two, I wanted to do this as myself and not as a character. And at least I'm wearing a bow tie. That's a little bit whimsical. But I wanted to do this as myself. This is my own point of view. Question number 6. Some of you might notice throughout these videos that I'm wearing the same clothes in every episode. I do own other clothes. It's just that every episode of this series, I'm going to be recording all of this in one day. So, even though they might be uploaded on different days, they're all going to be presented on the same day. Excuse me, they're all going to be recorded on the same day, so I'm not going to be running into the other room, putting on a different outfit each time. Question number 7. Do I have any personal beliefs that I'm going to be bringing to this video series? And the answer is I do have very strong opinions on the matter, but that's my third hat. Third figurative hat. I'm a believer in supernatural things, but I am not going to be pushing that point of view. I'm going to be pushing the logical point of view. I'm going to be taking a purely objective, neutral position for academic purposes. Or at least as best I can. I mean, Penn Jillette has a good phrase he uses, fair and extremely biased, and that's kind of what I'm going to be doing here. I'm extremely biased, but I'm going to be fair. Question number 8. Is there going to be a lot of swearing in this video series? I know that some of my other videos, some people didn't like all the swearing, and I'm not setting out to make a dirty or offensive video, but it's the internet, so I don't have to filter myself, and so I'm not going to. If I think it's a word that fits into a sentence, I'm going to use it, and if not, I won't. And let's see, number 9, some people might wonder about background noise. I do not have a directional microphone. I'm doing this in my living room. And so I just have the camera that came, or just have the microphone that came with the camera. It might pick up some other noise, might pick up neighbors, or might pick up like a train passing, or cars going by, or people outside, or pipes banging. Just try to ignore that if that comes up. And the last question that I'm sure somebody is going to ask is that a real stuffed raven behind me? No. No, that is plastic or something similar to plastic. I got it from a catalog. And the only reason I'm using this as a background is because this particular corner of the room is about the blankest area in my apartment. I didn't want to have a lot of clutter behind me, and this is the most neutral background I could find. So, is there a God? Short answer, I don't know, neither do you. Long answer, let's get into it. First of all, why do people believe there's a God? And why do people believe there is not a God? Well, first of all, why do so many people believe in a God? I think that probably the reason that so many people believe that there is a God is because they grew up with it. It's a force of habit. I mean, they might have other reasons, other experiences to justify their positions, but mostly it's just something that's worked for them since childhood, and they see no reason to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is especially true with some of the more liberal, some of the more humanistic religions. And, oh, by the way, fair warning, I'm going to say and a lot, because I'm thinking on the spot. And I'm forgetting what I was saying. Oh, because they were raised that way. And so people, they tend to favor what they grew up with. They might reinterpret, they might make lateral moves like, changing from a Catholic to a Protestant or from A to B. But there's not really that many people who are going to go, ooh, I was raised with no religion, but now I'm becoming religious. I mean, some people might, but you see in places like Russia where, this former Soviet Union where people were raised without a lot of religion, and so they didn't really pick up on it too much after the Soviet era ended. And, so I think that most of it has to do with upbringing. Why do so many people disbelieve in God? And that, when I say disbelieve, I mean are confident that there is not a God. Not don't have a belief or practice a belief. I mean actually think there is not. I think that probably most people who are explicitly atheist are really turned off by the fanatics. I think that people see religious fanatics on television and the media. They see the Westboro Baptist Church, they see Al-Qaeda, and they see creationist museums, and they go, whoa, that's religion, I don't want anything to do with that, and they just go to the opposite extreme. And I think that's a lot of, because almost every atheist I've ever met was raised in a very strict religious background and went away from it. Not all of them, but the majority of them. Very few were raised in a very liberal, humanistic religious upbringing. And so it's really just a matter of disassociation. Like, I don't want to be in the same category as those people. Those people are fanatics. I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to be in their category. I want to go to the opposite extreme. I think that's a factor. And also, another reason I think that there are more atheists today than there used to be, and I know that this is going to offend some people, a lot of people are not going to like this, but I really think this is true. I think that atheism is just fashionable right now. I think that there are a lot of people who are becoming atheists just because it's in vogue, and in a few years, if it should happen that the winds blow the other way, fashion changes, they'll drop it. I really think that's the case. I see a lot of people actually calling themselves atheists who technically shouldn't be. Like, they'll say, oh, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in the Christian God. But I'm open to the idea of a deist God or a pagan God or something else. Well, then shouldn't you be calling yourself an agnostic? Like, no, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in that God. And that, to me, that sounds very similar to the person who says, I'm a vegetarian, but I eat chicken. Or a woman who says, I'm a virgin, but I've taken it into the ass. It's like, well, that's not really the meaning of the word. You're just expanding the definition to include yourself in a category that you're not in. And so I think that is a sign. That is a sign that atheism is a matter of fashion nowadays. Not for everybody, but for a significant number of people. Too many people to simply dismiss. I think that's an important factor. Now, whatever the reason, though, whatever the reason a person becomes or sticks with an atheist or a theist or an agnostic, I think a lot of times they'll come up with new reasons to justify their position, rationalize their position, and this is where the big arguments come in. And this is where all of the academic, philosophical, ontological arguments come in. And that's what I'm going to be dealing with mostly in this series. And I've decided that the best way to do it is kind of Joseph Smith style, out of a hat. In this hat, I have written down approximately close to 100 philosophical and ontological arguments for or against God or religion. We're going to do this a fun way. So, let's see what the first argument is. I'm going to go through all of them, but we're going to have some fun by putting them in completely random order. The first argument for or against God is an argument for the existence of God. And it goes like this. The brain cannot produce truth chemically. All right, let me see if I can interpret this one. Basically, the argument is saying that if our brains are the product of a natural chaotic process, then we cannot reliably know what is true from what is false. It's merely by pure chance that our brains are able to determine anything at all, which means that we are unreliable and can come to wrong conclusions. So if we logically deduce that God does not exist, then there is no God to make sure that our brains come to the right conclusions and our brains can be wrong. Alternatively, if there is a God, then God does not have a chemical brain. He does not have an electrochemical matrix in his brain. He knows things intrinsically, and therefore he can program us to be capable of determining the truth. Here's the problem with this argument. Even if God designed our brains, we're still fallible. Otherwise, we would all come up to the same conclusions all the time. And even if our brains are fallible, it doesn't mean that every conclusion we reach is going to be wrong. We can still find a right answer. Think of it this way. A or B. If I flip a coin to determine which is correct, I've got a 50-50 chance. On the other hand, if somebody who knows the answer is telling me, but he might be lying, I still have a 50-50 chance. So it doesn't really make any difference. If our brains are fallible, we can still come to a right conclusion. And if God programmed our brains, we could still come to a wrong conclusion because he didn't program us to be perfect. So this argument does not actually prove anything one way or the other. Next argument. An argument against the existence of God. Fear is used to control and profit. People use fear. They exploit people's fears. They make people think things that aren't true so that they can manipulate them, control them, and make money off of them. We know this. So since religion does this, we can assume that religion is lying about everything, right? Well, not necessarily. Think about it. Terrorism. The government uses our fear of terrorism to profit. That is, take tax money and put it towards military and domestic spying. They use it to control us, airports, security, things like that. Domestic spying. Did they make up terrorism? No. That's a real thing. In fact, it's much easier to exploit the fear of something that does exist than to make up a fear of something that doesn't exist. So in that sense, we could say that organized religion is exploiting people's fear of something that really exists. In fact, it seems about as likely, if not more likely, than exploiting the fear of something that doesn't exist. So in that sense, this doesn't really prove anything. Next argument. An argument for the existence of God. And this one comes to us from Gödel. It's Gödel's ontological proof of God, and this is the paraphrased version, but basically it goes like this. God cannot be flawed by being imaginary. Let me explain. God exists either in our imaginations or in reality. But either way, God exists. And if God exists just in our imaginations, then we would have an incomplete God, an inferior God. Whereas if he exists in reality, we have a true God. But God is perfect and cannot have any flaws, cannot have any inferiorities. Therefore, the inferior imaginary God cannot exist. Therefore, God must only exist as something that we can imagine, but is also existing in reality. QED. Well, QE not so D. You see, the problem with this argument is that it assumes that we can imagine something having a quality that would make it real, even if it isn't real. I know this sounds like a lot of wordplay, but let me explain. Let's say that there is a unicorn next to me. This unicorn is either real or imaginary. I'm imagining it's a unicorn. It's an imaginary unicorn, therefore it's not real. Now I'm not going to imagine an imaginary unicorn. Now I'm going to imagine a real unicorn. It's still not really there. And the reason is because it has to be real in order for the quality that makes it real to be real. If it's not real, then it cannot have the real property of being real. In other words, we could be imagining that God is so great that he can't possibly not exist, but if he doesn't exist, then we're only imagining that he is that great. But he isn't really anything. So that doesn't hold up. Next argument. This one is an argument against God and is incredibly stupid. Jesus, a lot of these are focused really specifically on the Christian interpretation. Jesus may have been walking on ice, not water. And Mary may have been genetically a hermaphrodite who spontaneously impregnated herself. I did not make any of these up. I got every one of these off the internet. And I'm not going to play favorites. I'm not going to say, ooh, that's too stupid to dignify with a response. No, I'm addressing all of them indiscriminately. But this is just plain ridiculous. The idea is that every event in the Bible could be explained by natural phenomena. Here's the problem. The hypothesis to explain these phenomena are more ridiculous than the belief. Scenario. Mary, genetic hermaphrodite, spontaneously impregnates herself. Never happened before or since, just a one-time occurrence. And then her son just happens to be the guy who one day, when he stepped out of a boat, a piece of ice in a very hot climate suddenly showed up under his feet. He stepped on it, didn't slip, didn't tip over, walked from the boat to the shore with the ice moving under him the entire way. Nobody saw the ice. Everybody said, wow, you can walk on water, you must be superhuman. He doesn't correct them. He doesn't say, no, I was standing on a thing. Even if they don't know what ice is, they should know there's at least a thing floating. He doesn't correct them. Everybody sees what's going on, writes down exactly what they saw, precisely the way it appeared to them to be happening. Then the same guy, this guy must be Mr. Improbable. He's going against all the odds. The same guy is executed. Instead of dying, just goes into a coma, which he wakes up out of. The only person this happens to, the Romans, who are really good at killing people, somehow miss this one guy. He comes back, everybody thinks he's God, they write it down, and then, with no God to inspire the Bible and to supervise the transcription process, that story gets copied by hand for 2,000 years, translated in every language in the world without a mistake. The only mistake was in the people originally looking at the events. Whoever came up with this idea, I have to give you credit. You actually came up with something that is even stupider than he's a god. Okay? I mean, this is so improbable. Okay? It's a fictional story. That's more probable. It's a true story that was exaggerated. That's more probable. It was a true story that was mistranslated or miscopied. That's more probable. He's actually supernatural. That's more probable. But a series of misinterpretations that get written down and then copied with perfect accuracy for 2,000 years, that is the least probable thing I've ever heard. This is more ridiculous than saying there's a God. Next argument. This one I'm not sure if it's an argument for or against God. The Higgs boson. What about it? I've heard people claiming that there is a God saying, hey, they found the Higgs boson. And people claiming that there is not a God saying, hey, they found the Higgs boson. I don't know what you think you're trying to prove. It's called the God particle. It's a nickname, doesn't actually mean anything. Neutrinos are sometimes called ghost particles because they move through matter, but finding a neutrino doesn't mean there are ghosts or there aren't ghosts, it's just a name. That's like finding a starfish and saying, ooh, does this prove there are stars? No, it's just a name. Here's what, a lot of people don't really understand what the Higgs boson is. As best, now I'm not a scientist, but as best I could understand it, the Higgs boson is a piece of the Higgs field, and the Higgs field is a field which permeates the entire universe and stops us from going the speed of light. Tiny particles, energy particles, can zip right through, but bigger, heavier particles that are interacting with other particles clump together, in other words, atoms, they tend to get caught up in it. There's more drag. It converts their velocity into mass, and they can't go the speed of light. It's like trying to swim really fast through water with a big flat wall in front of your face. It's just going to slow you down. That's pretty much what the Higgs field is. What does this have to say about God? Not a thing. Next argument. This is an argument against God. A vacuum. God is everywhere, but a vacuum is a place where there is nothing. So how could somebody be someplace? How could something be somewhere where there is nothing? Well, there is no such thing as a vacuum. We thought there was. First we thought there wasn't. Then we found out there was. Then we found out we were wrong. There actually wasn't. In a vacuum, there are certain things. First of all, there's the Higgs field, which I just talked about. Then you've got virtual particles as a consequence of the uncertainty principle. You've got possibly gravitons. We're not sure exactly how gravity works. We're not sure exactly if there is a particle of gravity, but if there is, that's in there. There could be free-floating particles of energy that we just didn't notice, photons, for example. And then, of course, there's the actual fabric of space-time, which we're not really sure what that's made of. So really, a vacuum is just a place where we didn't think there was anything, we couldn't find anything, but then we found something. In fact, even if you didn't find anything there, if God is invisible, you wouldn't find him where you're looking for him. That's kind of what invisible means. You're not going to find it, even if it's there. So you can't really say that a vacuum is proved to have nothing in it, because A, it has something in it, and B, even if it didn't have anything in it that you can see, it still might have something that you don't see. Next argument. This one is an argument against God. God is all-knowing. He should have known what religion would become. If God knows that there's going to be holy wars and inquisitions and witch burnings and terrorist attacks, shouldn't he have just kept himself a secret? Not revealed himself? Not started any religions? Well, a couple of things. First of all, we don't know what would have happened if he didn't do that. We don't see into the alternate universe where religion never existed. I mean, who knows? We might have been a lot worse off. May have. We don't know. Second, it's possible that God didn't start the religions. Possible that God tried to hide himself, but somebody figured it out. Or perhaps made up something which coincidentally happened to be right. Now, I know that's kind of a stretch and very unlikely, but it's a possibility. Also, this assumes that God is all-knowing, which not every religion believes. Now, first of all, you got the pagan religions in which the gods are not all-knowing, have a higher vantage point, but they're not all-knowing. And then you've got several Christian philosophical interpretations in which, because God gave man free will, in order to ensure that free will, God cannot perceive the future of human activities. God can only foresee the outcome of natural phenomena. I mean, this is a very popular belief among many theologians. And this is something that has to be considered, that God simply doesn't know what man is going to do. And when you consider that possibility, this argument doesn't apply. Next argument. Argument for the existence of God. Now, this is actually several arguments which I've compiled into one simple sentence. And it goes like this. The Bible said so! Now, I don't know too many religious people who will just flat out say, yeah, there's a God, the Bible said so. They'll usually cite a very specific verse or a specific series of verses and say, well, it says right here, if you read in the book, it says it quite clearly. But to paraphrase, they are basically saying, because the Bible said so. That is the summary of every Bible quote that a person would cite to prove the existence of God. Now, of course, the problem, I think most people can see the flaw in this argument, and that is, if there isn't a God, then there's nobody to inspire the Bible, and if there's nobody to inspire the Bible, then the Bible could be wrong. So in order for the Bible to be right, there has to be a God to make sure it's right. And if there isn't a God, then the Bible could be wrong. And would have to be wrong because it says there is. So it doesn't actually prove anything. Next argument. An argument against the existence of God, and this is a big one. The Big Bang. The universe didn't start with, let there be light. It started with a bang. Well, what caused the Big Bang? That's the stock answer for most religious people. What caused the Big Bang? Well, let me tell you. The Big Bang is not a how or why, it's a what. It just says the universe began. In fact, when the Big Bang theory was first proposed, atheists were against it. Atheists believed in the steady state theory, the idea that the universe was just always here, it's infinitely old, it has no beginning. And they were really strongly against the Big Bang because they said that means the universe had a beginning. If the universe had a beginning, wouldn't that mean there was a God? And then we found out, yes, it did have a beginning. We called it the Big Bang, and that's not God, that's the Big Bang. Well, we don't know what caused the Big Bang. We have a lot of ideas. Some people say that could be because when the universe expands to a certain point, converts to entropy, every particle is moving at the speed of light, which means that everything in the universe is now occupying the same space simultaneously because of the dilation of time, which means that time would start over again. That's a possibility. There was one theory, one hypothesis, which has been pretty much debunked, but it was the idea that the universe is constantly expanding and contracting, and like a rubber band, it'll eventually collapse back on itself and start over. More recent measurements have shown that it's not actually in danger of collapsing back in on itself. Another one is the idea of the uncertainty principle. Again, that virtual particles may just spontaneously trigger matter, energy, space, time. Another possibility is that there are an infinite number of universes in a continuous state of banging into existence. Another one is that there are hyperspatial membranes that release huge amounts of energy when they collide with one another. So there are a lot of possible explanations, but none of them is certain. None of them is really, this is the way it happened. And that's the thing to consider. Now, here is the problem that I have with this. Why does God have to exist at the Big Bang? It doesn't say anywhere in any scripture that I've ever heard of that God created space-time or God created high-density plasma. Usually he just creates the land, or the sky, or something like that. A garden. So why couldn't, in fact, even Genesis starts off with, there was a void. Well, doesn't a void imply that space already exists? So in that sense, we could say that God came somewhere into play after the universe was already in existence at the beginning of this particular planet. Or maybe at a particular section of this planet, like maybe just this one little geographical region. Or maybe God is way back at the beginning creating hyperspace, creating the bulk from which this universe sprang forth, creating the cosmic quantum foam, or whatever it be. Why do we assume that the beginning of this particular space-time continuum is the making or breaking point for God? Oh, this planet came through a natural process. We'll push God further back. Actually, it's this way because I'm going from my point of view, but from your point of view, it's this way. Push God further back to the beginning of the galaxy. Oh, we see how the galaxy came into existence. We'll push God further back yet to the beginning of the universe. Oh, there are other universes possibly. Well, we can't push him back any further, so it's got to be there or nothing at all. No, it could be someplace else. And again, this is only the creator God we're talking about, which could apply to the God of Spinoza or the God of Abraham, not necessarily any pantheistic interpretation or pagan interpretation or non-traditional interpretation. It's really just the Abrahamic and deist concept of God, where the Big Bang would create a problem if we could explain why it happened, which, again, like I said, we still haven't quite figured that out yet. We have a lot of ideas, but we haven't quite figured it out. Doesn't hold up. Getting hoarse. Next argument. Argument against the existence of God. God needed no creator. It goes like this. We are complex, therefore we must have been created, but God is even more complex and didn't need to be created by anything. So if God, which is more complex than us, could exist without having been created, then why couldn't we, who are less complex, also exist without having been created? And I gotta admit, that's a pretty good argument. But here's the thing. We know that we were not always here. We had a beginning. If there's a God, we don't know that God had a beginning. So in that sense, we could say that God could be that thing that is infinite. Now, I will say this. It is illogical to me to think that the first thing that existed could have had intelligence, considering that intelligence requires complexity. And things that are more complex seem to be the result of things that are less complex. But if God is somehow infinite, then the whole thing falls apart. As some people believe, as many people believe that God simply had no beginning, then God doesn't need to be created because he doesn't have a beginning. We, if we couldn't come into existence by natural processes, which it seems that we were brought into existence by natural processes, but if we weren't, then we would have to have been created because we did not always exist. So there is a difference between that which is infinite and that which is finite. So you can't, they're apples and oranges is what I'm saying. Next argument. Argument against the existence of God. Prayers aren't answered. Goes like this. You pray for, you flip a coin, you pray for it to come up heads 100,000 times in a row, and it doesn't. No God! If there was a God, he would have listened to me. Well, what the hell do you think God is? Your servant? I mean, hey God, turn this hat into a duck. Oh, he didn't do it. Well, why would he? That would be a stupid thing to do. Maybe God just answers prayers because he is a being with free will and can decide for himself what prayers he thinks deserve to be answered or need to be answered, or what prayers are going to work out better in the long run. Maybe tomorrow the thing that you prayed for will actually not turn out the way you planned. Could be any number of reasons, or simply, God may have limits to his power. That is a possibility we have to consider. We can't just assume that if God exists, he must exist in a completely, infinitely, all-powerful state. It doesn't necessarily have to be an all or none thing. There could be a God of limited power. Anybody consider that possibility besides the pagans? So if God doesn't answer a prayer, maybe he just didn't want to. He has free will. He can do that. He can say no. Next argument. Maybe I will get through all these in one episode. This one is not really an argument against God. It's just an argument for why being an atheist is so fucking awesome. Atheists don't preach at people. Religious people are always preaching at people. Atheists never preach at people. Oh, aren't atheists wonderful? Well, that's the lie. Because I see atheists preaching all the time. There's billboards, it's like, hey, there's no God. There's people having arguments that there's no God. People posting comments on YouTube videos that there's no God. People posting Facebook statuses that there's no God. Atheists preach all the time. Now you're probably going to say, well, not all of them. Well, yeah, not all the religious people are preaching either. In fact, when you actually consider the fact that there are more people who believe in God than don't believe in God, you would think that there would be more people preaching that there is a God than preaching that there isn't a God, but it seems to be a pretty fair balance. At least in my experience. I've run into people making more arguments that there isn't a God than there is. Usually the people who think there is a God just say, well, I think there's a God. And some people get a little, some people take having a cross around your neck, and by the way, this is not a cross, this is an ankh. Or just, saying, oh, God be with you, God bless, that's like saying God bless you when somebody sneezes. You're not really trying to convert them to anything. It's just a reflex. It's just a polite saying like hello. It doesn't actually mean anything. And so things like this are not preaching, okay? I'm talking about the people who are actually actively trying to convince you to change your point of view to their point of view. And that seems to be extremely rare with religious people. From my experience, anyway. So, yeah, atheists, there's a lot of them who do preach. Sorry, true. Next argument. There's a hair on this one. Should clean out the hat. Argument for the existence of God. If there's no God, then where do we go after we die? Well, let me explain something. God and the afterlife are not connected. By connected, I mean it's not A and B or neither A nor B. Okay, you could have one and not the other. There could be some form of life after death without a God, or there could be some type of God without some type of an afterlife. We don't know. Doesn't necessarily follow that one goes with the other. They could both go together. They could both exist. Now, where do we go after we die? Well, that depends on your point of view. You take a stick, break it in half. Where did the stick go? You broke it in half. Yes, but where did the stick's spirit go? Where did the whole stick go? Well, nowhere, you broke it. So it is conceivable. It is conceivable that when we die, we just die. It is possible. Not pleasant, but possible. On the other hand, if we look at the spirit as simply another word for mind, I really think that spirit and soul are just a fancy way of saying mind or consciousness. So let's just use that word. Can consciousness survive without the body? Well, maybe. Take, for example, a computer. It's hardware, but it contains programming, it contains files, and those files could be transferred to other places. A cloud drive. So why couldn't we transfer our programming to a cloud? Or another computer, another system. Reincarnation, perhaps. Many possibilities. But it is not necessary. And besides, even if there is a God and there is an afterlife, we don't necessarily go to the same place. I mean, take the ancient Greeks, for example. Zeus lived up on Mount Olympus. But when people died, they didn't automatically go to Mount Olympus. They went into the realm of Hades. So there's really no necessary connection between life after death and God. And even if there is life after death, it might not be another place. It could be just this place in another body, or we could just go to some other place which has nothing to do with God, or we could just go nowhere. Many possibilities, we just don't know. We just don't know. Next argument. Oh, this is one of the most popular arguments of all time, and one of the most annoying to me. An argument against the existence of God, or not so much against the existence of God, but just against the idea of acting as if there is a God, and that is that religion causes violence. People kill each other in the name of religion, therefore perhaps we'd be better, even if there is a God, we should just act as if there isn't a God, because then we won't be killing each other. Well, here's my question. Does it? Does it really cause violence, or does it just kind of go along for the ride? Take the Crusades, for example. You have the Muslims over there, you have the Christians over there. And for about 1,000 years, they just kind of ignore each other. Until there's a land dispute. Then suddenly their concepts of God want them to fight each other. Well, aren't they fighting over land? In fact, many of the Crusaders passed up Jewish and Muslim and pagan villages and went to fellow Christian villages and plundered them instead. Why? Were they trying to convert Christians to Christianity? No, it just so happens that those particular villages had the most money to steal. So in this sense, we could say that greed causes violence. The Inquisition? This started with getting rid of political enemies. Al-Qaeda? Why did they attack us? Well, because they were mad at us. They were still holding a grudge. And remember, Al-Qaeda, they used to like us back in the 80s. They used to like the United States because they were against the Russians. They were fighting the Russians in those days. And we were like, hey, Al-Qaeda, you don't like the Russians? Neither do we. Good for you. Then we set up bases there in order to protect oil wells and our interests there. And they go, now we don't like you. Now we don't like Americans. Seems that it's just a territorial thing. Now, I'm not saying that they were justified in their attacks. Certainly they were radicals and fanatics, but was it religious? Or was it mostly social and political and economic? The religion just seemed to show up after the fact. And people say, well, people use religion to justify violence. Well, why? Why do they need to find something in religion to justify violence? Because religion tells you not to be violent. If religion tells you not to be violent, you have to reinterpret it in such a way that would allow you to be violent. And if it wasn't for religion, you could just skip that step. You could just skip the step of justifying and saying it, well, I'm justified in acting violently for political reasons. It's kind of like when a parent tells a teenager, you know, be home by 11. You know, if he shows up at 11:30 and says, oh, I thought you meant 11 in the morning tomorrow. Well, no, you didn't. You knew what you meant. You're just trying to justify your actions. You're trying to rationalize. And if you didn't tell them that, they wouldn't bother. If you didn't tell them to be home by a certain time, they wouldn't bother to rationalize. So in that sense, we could say that religion doesn't cause violence or prevent it. It just adds an extra step before you become violent. So why are so many violent people religious? Because so many people are religious. This is exactly the same as people who say that rock and roll causes violence, or comic books cause violence, or scary movies cause violence, or rap music causes violence, or heavy metal causes violence, or video games cause violence. Well, all these violent kids, they were playing video games, so were all the non-violent kids. Likewise, all these religious people are violent, well, so are all these violent people are religious, so are all the non-violent people. One of the things that I notice very often is a lot of people who argue for religion will bring this up. They'll say, well, religious organizations do a lot of charity work. They teach people to be kind to one another. And the skeptics always say the same thing. Well, I think people would be kind and charitable to each other even if they weren't religious. I agree. So then why is it so unthinkable that if a person is violent because of religion, that they wouldn't be just as violent if they weren't religious? Maybe this is just an asshole. Maybe this is just a bad, violent person who is going to be violent whether you give him religion or not. It just doesn't hold up. It just doesn't hold up. I mean, and the idea, and Christopher Hitchens, who has brought up this point several times, has said that religion is the only thing that can make a person feel so justified as they could actually do horrible, evil things to other people. Well, if that were true, then that would mean it was physically impossible for a person who didn't believe in a God to do something violent. But that's not the case. Two of the biggest killers in history were Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. They weren't religious. And some people like to say, well, their dedication to their political and social views was kind of like a religion. Now that's stretching. That is really stretching. That's like saying, you might as well just say people shouldn't believe in things, or people shouldn't have ideals, because people with ideals could become violent. That having a point of view is kind of like a religion. And that's really not what we're talking about here. So, no matter which way you slice it, religion doesn't really seem to cause violence so much as just hang around with it a lot. There's no reason to think that if we got rid of the religion, the violence would go away. We're still greedy, we're still territorial, we're still vengeful, we're still assholes. Next argument for the existence of God. God has to exist in order for an atheist to argue against a God. Going to repeat that. There has to be a God in order for an atheist to say that there isn't one. Otherwise, what is the atheist saying isn't there? That makes no sense at all. Watch this. There is not a rhinoceros sitting on the table in front of me. How did I do that? Doesn't there need to be a rhinoceros here for me to say there isn't one? Otherwise, how would I know what to say isn't here? Doesn't hold up. Doesn't hold up. Maybe the idea, maybe an abstract idea of God has to exist in order to argue against the existence of a literal God, but no one's really disagreeing about the existence of the abstract idea of God for academic discussion. It's a literal God that we're talking about. And some people say that, well, God would have to exist in order for an atheist to take the time to argue against God. Why would anybody waste their time saying what isn't there? Well, maybe because they legitimately believe it isn't there. You ever think of that? I mean, it stands to reason that if you believe there is nothing there, and somebody tells me there's something there, I might say, no, there isn't. And besides, if there has to be a God in order to say there isn't one, doesn't that mean that there has to also not be a God in order to say there is one? Of course not. Wouldn't make any sense. This argument is worthless. Next argument. You know what, maybe I should, I've got a lot of these to go, so I am going to break this video up. Maybe I'll break it up at an earlier point too, but I'm going to take a pause here and start the next episode.